Hi, so I'm so glad we're here today. We're picking up again, starting the Zoomcast process, and we're here with my very special, dear friends and soul family mentors. I mean, how long have we known each other? I think we said 17 years, so this is Steve and MaryAnn Orsary, and yeah, I'd love to just hear from you a little bit about your work and sort of how you came into different modalities of healing, and sort of just how the threads of your work come together. That's really what I think is really impactful for me is in all of these years seeing how you both work together. That's really beautiful. Yeah. Who wants to start?
You want to start?
Sure, I'll start. Well, I'll just start by saying that I met Steve in 1980. I was living in a community at the time, and he visited and moved in a short while later. And so we became housemates, and we started doing attunement work together. And attunement work works with the endocrine system of the body. And we learned how to do this process to balance the endocrines and from that to sort of balance the whole body. And Steve and I were kind of on a team that did that. And we were buds at the time, and that's kind of how both of us got our start in doing energy work. And we went, it was a lot of years past doing that and being friends and dating and then getting married, and then we went on to study a work called bioenergy balancing, which is fabulous work. We learned how to do joint muscle testing. We learned how to do that to have a conversation with people's bodies and energy fields, and that bioenergy balancing kind of forms the basis of the work that we're still doing now in current time. And so that was kind of a start. And so we spent all these years learning about doing energy work. And I was sort of feeling the need to learn more about how to care for people emotionally and how to be really present for them. So I studied Hakomi, which is somatic body centered psychotherapy. And I found that to be very kind and very gentle and a very sweet way of holding people and being with people. And so I did that for a couple of years and a lot of years of practicing, and went on to get my MFT or get my MA. I went to Meridian University and then got licensed and practiced for a few years. But now mostly I sort of use that in service to the work that we do together.
Mm,
So
mm,
that's kind of the nutshell version
I
of
love
what
that.
I come out of.
Thank you. Yeah, what I'm hearing in that is like there's such a holistic way of holding that is, like you said, you were working with the energies in the body, you were working with the applied kinesiology to speak to the body, and then Hakomi to hold the body and the psyche in the body, and really like how embodied that work is, and just loving and honoring that thread that you're holding in terms of both the emotional support, and the somatic. That's really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because the body really does tell you so much. We're busy listening to words and talking, and then the body has its own thing that it's doing, and it really communicates a lot. So to have some tools to know how to access that, I think is valuable for us and for any practitioner and people in general. So
Yes,
it's really valuable.
definitely, definitely. Yeah, and there's times I know that we sometimes bypass that in our culture, and it's really a reclaiming. So I hear you working in that way, and I'm so grateful. And yeah, thank you for sharing that story. Yeah, how about for you, Steve? Yeah, tell me a little bit of background in your modalities and what you bring.
Well, as MaryAnn mentioned, we met in the community that we lived in back in 1980. And I always like to throw back to that because I always say this because it's true. It's the only time in my life where the person that I wanted to get to know and be romantic with, that we were friends first.
Mm,
So we became friends, and then we noticed each other, and then we started dating, and then it went on from there for some years. We lived in that community for like 12 years and then moved on from there. One of our community members actually introduced us to the process of bioenergy balancing, which, going back to very early things that we said in a brochure that we wrote 20 years ago, is like, if your body could speak, what would it want to tell you?
mhm,
Back to the embodiment thing that you were mentioning. So using a muscle test, which we do as a team, we pretty much always work together as a team in our practice, in our healing practice at the North Star Healing Center. So we work together and we use this muscle test to ask questions of the body and to get answers, yes and no answers. It's a form of dowsing. We're also members of the Dowsing Society, American Society of Dowsers, ASD, and so that carried on from there. For me, individually, I've always had a real affinity with the natural world. I grew up, living outside, playing outside, being in the woods as a kid, a lot of the time on my own. I really loved being alone in the woods.
mm,
And that carried to eventually becoming a backpacker and hiking 1,500 miles on the Pacific Crest Trail, which actually led me to the community where we met, the branch of the community that some friends of mine were in. So that sort of naturally over the years led me to a connection with shamanic work. Um, my mom tells a story that when I was in 6 years old and we went to the city park and they were making lunch out there under the trees, that I told her a story about how to survive in the woods.
mm,
It's like, well, if we lived in the woods, we would catch rabbits and we would eat the rabbits and we'd make our clothes out of their skins and all this kind of things. And she's saying, I don't know where you got this. I never taught you that. That was not in any books that you ever read as a child. So there's something, a case to be made for past life there, perhaps.
mhm,
But carrying on with that, I became engaged with shamanic work, studied with the Foundation for Shamanic Studies up through their 3 year program, and pretty much most, if not quite all of their classes, but almost all their classes. Did a little work with the Four Winds School and connected with the Moonai Key there and other teachers that we've had over the years that have connected us to various shamanic techniques and practices which we use in our healing work. Things like soul retrieval and extraction and psychopomp and working with power animals, that type of thing. Um, and that connected us eventually to the Caro tradition. The Caro are the people who live in the high Andes in Peru,
mm,
and they were not conquered by the Spanish when they came in. When the conquistadores came in, they just moved even higher to the higher elevations, and they either weren't found or the Spanish could reach them there. And they have kept all of their traditions, their ceremonies, their transmissions, the Carpi transmissions intact, which we've gone to Peru and received those and worked with them. So that's carried on into my work primarily as shamanic practice. So kind of together, MaryAnn has the psychotherapy, the psychological aspects of it, and the embodied personal aspects of it. I've got the natural aspects and working with the shamanic traditions, and then we work together and I'll link it up and with our mutual muscle testing.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I can really feel into that that resonance with the natural world, with the elements, with the animals and all the beings, and feeling definitely like maybe there's a past life or past lives, right, lineage of working in that way, but also the ancestral, like it's like at some point in our DNA, like you go far enough back, there's an indigenous community, right, that's living on the land, that's living in harmony with the earth, that's working with spirits. And I think there's something really beautiful about coming into contact with sort of those traditions too, of like our own indigeneity. in Europe, or you know what I mean. So I think there's something interesting happening there as well. So yeah, I love hearing about the way of working with spirits and with power animals, and um, having all the allies that we have to, you know, to be able to support the healing process. So thank you for sharing that. And wow, and I know too that your love of being on the land, you know, when, you know, pre-COVID times, we would do those sacred hikes to different locations on Mount Tam, and have ceremonies. So that was also really powerful. Yeah.
Maybe I could interject here. You reminded me of something Michael Harner used to say in the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, that the foundation works with what they call core shamanism. They look for practices that are common to a number of different cultures around the world, like virtually all the different cultures, shamanic cultures, use extraction, or they use soul retrieval, and so those things are common elements, and those are the elements that are included in core shamanism. But one of the things that is probably true of us more fair-skinned European-based peoples is that when the what's the name of it, the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition, when it entered Europe, many of the indigenous healers and traditional peoples of the more Caucasian race were wiped out. All the wise women were labeled witches, and the herbalists were burned at the stake. And so there's been kind of a gap there in our white traditions that's unfortunate, but there's still a pretty strong presence within the Celtic tradition and some of the others. And you go to Siberia, where the Sami people are still working with the reindeer and all of that. And anyway, it's a kind of a shame. But if we go back far enough, we could even make our ancestor contacts there.
Mm-hmm.
It's still there, and maybe it's skipped a few generations in terms of conscious work with it, but we can go back and rekindle and reconnect with those traditions through our ancestors.
Mm, mm. I love hearing about that, especially, you know, as we're sort of in this period of time between, you know, the end of October and now with, you know, this week of honoring the, you know, the indigenous people of this land, that has been colonized, and just kind of feeling into like lineage and history and healing, and what kind of healing needs to be done. And I mean, that sort of, you know, lends us to the topic of the ancestor work. And what I'll say to just sort of introduce it is that I know you've been kind of focusing on this more in the last few years. And I got to see your class at the Dowsers conference in Flagstaff, and you also did a demonstration there, and so it was really palpable in the room. You know, you have a bunch of these people who are sensitive, you know, tuning into the process that's in front of us, that's unfolding, you know, that you're doing. And what the one thing that was really powerful to me, that I really wanted to kind of draw out some more, was like finding the allies, the ancestor allies that are resourcing, before you go in and do any kind of working with the wounding. And so maybe if you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, I think that one of the questions is, who are our ancestors? Our ancestors obviously are the ones that preceded us. They might be alive. They could be parents or grandparents or great grandparents that have not crossed over into the unseen realms yet. But we have a line of ancestry that goes back along our bloodlines. That's the obvious one that we always think of, you know, through, you know, the mothers and fathers and grandfathers that go back and back and back. And there's also a connection that we have through our what I call our spirit lines. It's the connections that we have made through the spiritual lineages that we may have chosen to be connected with or been initiated into through various trainings or practices that any of us might have had. And those connections come in. Like I mentioned, the Karo people, obviously they're indigenous, and I am not directly of that lineage, but I've been initiated and received the transmissions from the indigenous, some of the indigenous elders, and that gives me a real palpable connection um, to that. So working with ancestors is, you mentioned the allies. It's We all have allies. People always talk about, well, angels. Perhaps that's probably in our culture the one aspect of spiritual alliance that is most accessible to most of us in this culture. But animal allies, and the training in shamanic training, they say that it's very unlikely that any of us would be alive if we didn't have allies.
Mm-hmm.
Guardian angels is the one are the ones in our culture that we identify, and they're those pictures we have hanging up in our on our wall. I think we have one hanging over our bed that is the angel with the wings, guiding the child across the bridge, and so we have allies in that sense, both spirit allies, spiritual tradition allies, and blood allies, our blood ancestors that connect with us and work with them. So a good idea when we do this work, just as in shamanic work, we might go to find an animal ally, find a spirit animal that you have, or a power animal that gets connected to you in a very specific way, that we can actually go to our ancestral lineages, both spirit and blood, and ask for an ally to help us and protect us in the work. Is there somebody out there that can help me? Is there somebody who is well, who is capable of helping, who is willing to help, and who has access to us, and that we have some kind of affinity with, that can come and help us. So we will in our work sometimes do a bit of a journey, a kind of a miniature journey where people can connect with allies. And you go back along your lines, and everybody does this differently. There's no one right way to do it. That's the wonderful thing about shamanism, is that there's nobody that's making up rules and saying this is the way to do it. In cultural shamanism, there may be trainings to say this is the way we have done it, and this may help you to do it. In core shamanism, we have training to just say, what do you find? So in a journey, or in going inside, or in meditation, or in dreams, we might make contact with someone who can be an ally to help us, assist us in our process to do ancestral healing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that there's different types of allies that we have access to. And sometimes it's like I imagine that, like for me, when I'm doing the work, it's like there's a certain team that'll come in with me. And then there's also like other ones that'll come in specifically for certain jobs or certain types of things that are needed, or some one of their guides will come in. And so I imagine that it can be different, every time, but then maybe there's also certain ones that you work with regularly. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. It's completely accurate. It's like every time we do a session, any kind of a healing session, we do a connection with the upper world. That's the
Mm-hmm.
principles in shamanism are the three worlds: the upper world, the celestial realm; the lower world, the realm of the earth, of the deep earth; and the middle world, which is physical reality, where we all live and move around and stomp our feet and make contact with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So it totally makes sense to have our allies with us before we venture into doing to healing an ancestor. That it seems like the first thing and the logical thing to do is to call on our ancestor helpers to be with us when we commence to do ancestor work.
Mm-hmm.
Just to
And do
state that
you,
explicitly.
and how do you identify the who the ancestor is, and what they need? Is it similar to the bioenergy balancing where you would use applied kinesiology, or are there other methods to find the kind of like how do you orient, I guess?
Yeah, I think that that's true what you said. This is as to make it be specific. It's when we're working with ancestors, when we're doing ancestor work. How do we find not only the ancestor ally, but how do we find the ancestor that needs to be healed?
Hmm.
I think the principle that might apply here that's worth prefacing this with, it's something the last talk we gave, we called it the ancestor ripple effect.
Hmm.
It's the idea that if we have an ancestor who has received a wound,
Hmm.
that wound can be passed down through the generations. That's easy to see, especially in psychotherapy circles, where if abuse occurs to a person, that abuse tends to get passed down. The boy receives abuse from an uncle or a father or something, and then he passes it down to his son, who passes it down to his son or his daughter, and it fans out from there. And the pattern, it becomes a pattern of abuse. It
Hmm.
starts out as an individual event, and then it spreads out into a pattern. So what we're doing is tracing the patterns back, and we
Hmm.
might do this through asking questions for with our applied kinesiology, our muscle test. It's like this. MaryAnn, we work as a team, so she'll hold up her arm and we'll say, "Give me a yes."
We'll have one hand on the client, so
And so we're
that's
the
there.
extension cord for the client. Client is in the
Hmm.
middle. This is a yes,
Yeah.
and this is a no.
Hmm.
It's like if something is affirmative and expansive for the client, we feel that energy running through this. The muscle gets stronger and the arm goes up. And the opposite is true, that if it's a negative, if it's restrictive, or it dampens down the energy, then the muscle gets weak and the hand goes down.
And there's a variety of yeses. It can be yes, it can be yes.
Right,
But
Or
it's
just
like if you're
no.
talking to somebody and you ask them a question, you said, "Yeah, do you want to go out for pizza?" "Yeah." Or "Yeah." Yeah.
I think I'm more the latter, I think.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So and I remember sometimes too there's a way that sometimes it's not responsive. I mean, do you ever see that in the ancestor work where it's like, let's clear it without talking about it, or is there a way that it's kind of like, oh, they're not wanting to talk, or anything like that, or is there ways you can kind of go around and be like, okay, well, let's talk to the uncle first and then get back to the is there I'm wondering, like, if there's ever any, if you bump up against anything, like, I think, like you said the other day, there was, the intention was, oh, we're going to do this work, and then they're like, nope, okay, well, we're going to do something else then, being open, right, to seeing like what actually needs to happen in this session.
Yeah, I think that's true. And actually, I never thought about asking the uncle. I think that's a really good idea. Uh, I guess the line I've been working on, literally line, the ancestral line, it goes, um, when you're locating an issue with a client who needs the work, and they don't always need ancestral work, we don't
Right.
always do ancestral work. We came upon ancestral work the way we kind of discovered it. You want to tell that story about how we discovered it?
Well, I think we were muscle testing somebody. We were trying to ask the person, um, do you know why this is here? Do you know why this issue is here? And we were getting really just vague answers. And we started asking, well, is this something you're carrying for somebody else? And I don't know. You take it. I'm not
Yeah,
sure
it's
where.
it's kind of like we're trying to get, okay, when we're muscle testing, sometimes you get a series of no, no matter what question you get,
Yes.
it's no,
Yeah.
no, 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 no. And then you say, is this okay to talk about? No.
Right.
And so then you might do what we might do, what you suggested, is ask, is there something you'd like to let go of if you didn't have to talk about it or explain it or disclose that it was scary or disclose the embarrassment and the shame over what happened or whatever it is.
Hmm.
And so then there's something you can clear without talking about it. Just let it come into the energy field and sweep it off.
And we've also asked, is this pain in your back yours? No. Well, does this pain belong to somebody else? Yes, it does. Does it belong to someone in your family? No, nobody in my family. A friend of yours? No. well, does it belong to somebody who's not on this planet or to some other being? No. Um, and I don't know why it occurred to us at one point to say, does this belong to one of your ancestors?
Mm,
So, then we started inquiring after, well, where is it? Who is it? How far back is it? And so, there's always these moments of, well, we've never asked that before. Then there's a discovery and something new opens up in another direction that we haven't done before.
right, right. The work is always evolving. Yeah. And I remember too, you were mentioning like you would say, is it on the mother's line or the father's line? Yes, no, and then you can kind of go back and be like, is it their mother or their okay, their mother, and then their her father or whatever it is. So you can kind of actually go back through these flows, these rivers, really of ancestors to kind of get to the seed, right, of this pattern. And then it sounds like there's a way to then work with that ancestor. That would be like sort of the next step if they're open to it, right? Is that where you go next, is to work directly with that ancestor?
Yeah, when we after we worked with it for a while, we kind of developed a bit of a protocol on how to work with it. And it's we find it's useful to trace back, as you suggested, where along the line is it? So one of the first questions we'll ask is this on your mother's line or is it on your father's line? Is it going back through your mother, your father? Okay, that reduces it by the ancestry by half. So you can start to narrow it down. And then we say, well, how many generations back is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is. It
Sometimes it's 80.
sometimes it is, and sometimes it's one or two. Uh, Very often in our work, we find it's probably between 5 and 7 generations back. And if you think that a generation is 25 years approximately, maybe somebody's 20 or 25, especially in previous generations when they had their child. So maybe an average of about 25 years. So if you go back 4 generations, you're going back 100 years. Um, so we might trace it back. And what we're trying to do in this is to locate the ancestor who was the source of the wounding.
Mm-hmm.
So as MaryAnn was saying, we're asking questions about it. Is this? It's not. No, I mean, I'm just kind of doing this, but this is our protocol. So it's like you're asking, is it okay? Is it this? Is it that? Is it something physical? Is it something emotional? Is it something vibrational? Maybe it's vibrational, but and finally, like, gosh, dead end, dead end. We finally asked, is it yours? No, it's not mine. Is it somebody that's alive on the planet? No, it's not somebody who's alive on the planet. Was it from a past life? No, it's not a past life. Ah, was it an ancestor? Yes.
Okay.
So then you determine that it's an ancestor. And some of the information you're getting, most of the information you're getting is from the client. The client has the connection with this. So we're asking the client's body consciousness or their higher self,
Mm-hmm.
how far back is it? Where do we go to find this person? And then you look for patterns. Does it go back through all the men? The father to his father, to his father, to his father, to his father? Or does it go back through the women? The mother to her mother to mother. So it's the mothers. Is it the mothers or the fathers? Does it alternate generations? Is it a completely random pattern? Which also can happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, at any rate, you find out how many generations, and you go back and say, okay, it was through your mother's line. Was it your mother's mother's mother, your mother's father's going all the way back, or alternate? And you go back, find the generation back, okay, and you determine that it was a great 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 grandfather. And then you say, okay, you ask to speak to the presence of the one who was wounded, to the great 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 grandfather. Grandfather, can we speak with you? First of all, let me ask you, um, do you see that this is your great 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 granddaughter? Yes. Wouldn't you like her to be well?
Mm.
Absolutely. I mean, what parent? And we've never found it. I imagine there could be situations where someone actually harbors ill intent toward their offspring. But if you go into the ancestor deep enough, there's a part of them that really wants their offspring, their progeny, to be well.
Mm-hmm.
So would you do you realize that if we can release this for you, that this is a pattern that runs down through the family? This is the ancestor ripple effect, that if we heal the ancestor, that healing ripples down. It's kind of like science fiction. It's going back in time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like if you killed your ancestor in the past, you wouldn't exist anymore.
Right.
In this case, if you heal your ancestor in the past, the wound no longer exists anywhere in the family.
Right.
You go to the origination, to the source of the problem, and if it can be healed there, it's like you can feel it and see it. It just ripples down through the generations out to this person that you're working with, but all of their relatives.
Mm-hmm.
It could heal family patterns, um, genetic patterns, things that have been identified as genetic, or this it may not be genetic. It may be an emotional pattern that
Mm-hmm.
gets passed down through the family,
Mm-hmm.
and so forth. It could be something physical. It could be a physical malady. It could be an emotional pattern. It could be a vibrational pattern. It could be a way of thinking. It could be a belief pattern.
Mm-hmm.
You go and heal any one of those, and that's healed. That's cleared for everyone. We once had a man that came to us, and we worked with the ancestor part of it, and determined that it was there was alcoholism in his family, and we went back several generations to the source of the alcoholism. And this man, once we cleared the ancestor, and it came down to the fact that this client on our table in front of us was clear, he said, I have a son that I haven't spoken to in years. He refuses to speak with me. Do you think this might help? I said, well, it could. Why don't you keep us posted?
Mm-hmm.
So a week later, he called us back and said, my son called me.
Mm-hmm.
Hadn't spoken to him in years.
Wow.
We worked with another woman once where there was a pattern of bitterness. She wanted to work on her diabetes, and we traced that back to a wound that was in her, one of her great grandmothers or something, and it was a pattern of bitterness versus sweetness
Mm-hmm.
relative to the diabetes. We cleared that. This was actually at Dowser's conference a few years ago. It was in a demo in a class, and we cleared it, worked with it, and she came back the next morning and said, I tested my blood sugar this morning. It's down 60 points.
Wow.
So, I mean, it doesn't always work that way, but it has happened. And it's really an interesting process to track.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing those like really specific examples of how shifting the energy and releasing the trauma, releasing the emotions, releasing the vibrational um, coex is the word that comes to mind. This complex, right, of energy that's trapped in time. That when you clear that, then everyone benefits. Everyone that's downstream of that initial wound. Okay. And
Absolutely. That's
the
right on.
reason, yeah, that it resonates for me in my work too is like I'm always looking for the source of the wound and finding the pattern in the past lives. And so when I can see how that dovetails with like, okay, so we have the soul line, which is different than the transmitted initiations and things like that, like you were talking about. Like I have the medicine Buddha transmission, so in a way I have that lineage too. But the past lives that we actually were inhabiting other bodies, and then the DNA line, right, which is the ancestral line, where it's like, oh, throughout history, like things get passed down, right? Then so like, yeah, with epigenetics they say actually there's a lot more flexibility to change the physical body and the neurology, right? And I think that's sort of what we're speaking to is like if we can find ways to heal vibrationally, then it can actually impact the physical body.
Absolutely. Yes.
Beautiful.
If as we there, this one of the statements they say in astrology is as above so below. And I think that's a direct metaphor for what happens with physical maladies, that we are invisible before we're visible.
Mm-hmm.
The patterns of our existence, including all of our body and genetic factors and the functions of our organs and our blood and our flesh and bone, it all originates at an original level in the original. This is one of the principles of bioenergy balancing, that it starts in the bioenergy. It starts in the unseen template, and then it steps down and filters down into the physical, which is, I think, what you're describing there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can heal something at the level of the unseen, it becomes physical. If you can heal something at the level of the ancestor that preceded you, that distortion is cleared for the entire line, the entire family tree, every root and branch and twig
Mm.
and
Mm.
leaf.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, and like I said, one of the reasons I wanted to sit with you today and have you share more about this is because when I'm doing, the Akashic work, then it's like if I'm feeling into that there's ancestor work, I want them to be able to go and receive that work from you. And so, yeah, just maybe say a little bit about like how people can get a hold of you. And then I'll also be posting this link up on YouTube, so we'll have that up as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's neat.
Yeah, definitely. People could email me at morsary, Orsary, at comcast.net, or you can phone me at 415-924-6516. And we can talk, we can chat, we can set up a session for you if you want.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a starting point.
I don't know if you could put this into afterward somewhere, but our website, we have a website for the North Star Healing Center, the used to be the Bioenergy Balancing Center North,
Mm-hmm.
which is www.bio no bio
Wait,
bio www
dot
bioenergy
okay, you're right.
hyphen balancing.com.
Perfect. Yeah, and I will be putting that in the description underneath the video, so we'll have that link, that hyperlink in there as well. And the last thing that I was gonna say too is just how grateful I am to have been a lot of that the ways that I learned how to use my body as an instrument to support other people and to kind of hear how the body speaks and things was from all the time learning from you. And so I'm so grateful for all of that time that we've spent and just developing my own intuitive capacities. And so yeah, just to feel like, oh yes, we're actually a team, and I feel that way with you. So yeah, so I definitely
too.
Yes,
thank you.
that's really is what we, I think collectively, you and us and all the other light workers and healers, that's what we're about, is bringing people into their own power,
Yeah.
into their own healing, and they can heal it, they can pass it on. It's like, I'm happy to often what we do, we just give away. We don't, we work with people, on a fee basis for a healing level, but workshops are often, like through the Dowsers conference,
Mm-hmm.
they're just, here, this is what we do, and if you learn how to do it and carry it on, blessings to you, and let's heal the planet, heal all the people.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yes, and there's so many great resources through the dowsers, both the West Coast dowsers and the American dowsers, and then the Golden Gate dowsers as well, right? So yeah, we can definitely get those links in there as well. Great.
Jill, so nice to be with you as always.
Always nice
Thank
to be with
you.
you.
It was
Appreciate your spirit
so
and
wonderful.
intelligence, and
Yes.
Thank you.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.